Chapter 1. The Lost Voice. The year was 2239, and humanity had long since spread itself across the stars. It was a time of exploration, a time when Earth's ambitious reach for the unknown had blossomed into a network of colonies scattered across the Milky Way. No longer bound by the constraints of their home planet, humans had made their mark on distant worlds, each more alien and strange than the next. But even with the vastness of space, there were still pockets of the universe that remained untouched, places where the history of long-dead civilizations was all but forgotten. And for the most part, humanity remained a stranger in the shadows of these places, no matter how far its ships could fly. There were ancient species that predated humanity's rise by eons, species whose histories and languages were as intricate and unfathomable as the vast expanses of space itself. And then there was Zelria, a small, unassuming planet that orbited a sun at the edge of a forgotten sector, a world of mystery and silence. It wasn't on any galactic maps that mattered, not really. It was a world relegated to the dustbins of history. But for Lucas Brody, an archaeologist who had spent his entire career unearthing the forgotten, Zelria was the place that promised something different, something rare. Brody was far from the sort of person one might expect to be at the forefront of intergalactic exploration. He was quiet, humble, and driven by a love of history and culture that transcended the typical scientific drive for discovery. He wasn't interested in alien technologies or the political machinations that swirled around the powerful galactic empires. No, Brody was obsessed with language, with communication, with what it meant to truly understand another species, not just their technology, but their very essence, their thoughts and dreams woven into their words. It was this obsession that had led him to Zelria, a planet spoken of in hushed tones among the more obscure circles of galactic archaeology. The planet had been forgotten by nearly every known civilization, its history erased from the maps of time, and its language lost in the archives of the past. Zelria was known for one thing: its ancient ruins, sprawled across the surface like forgotten monuments of a bygone age, monuments that held secrets older than most known species in the galaxy. But the true significance of Zelria had nothing to do with the physical ruins. It was in the language of its long-dead inhabitants, a language so complex and so beautiful that it had defied translation for centuries. Many had tried to decipher it, of course. Many had ventured to Zelria, looking for some way to understand the elusive language. But every effort had failed. No one had ever been able to speak it, to read it, to understand it. And so, the planet had remained silent, its people long gone, leaving only their words behind like whispers in a forgotten wind. Until Brody came. It was a lonely, somewhat uninspiring assignment. A routine survey, a small piece of a much larger project dedicated to cataloging the lost histories of the galaxy. For most, it would have been a waste of time, just another dead-end planet in an already overcrowded galaxy. But to Brody, it was the culmination of years of research, a chance to unlock the final mystery of Zelria. He had heard the rumors, seen the data, and knew that somewhere on that planet, hidden in the ruins, lay the key to everything. And so he had come, alone, to Zelria, his heart pounding with anticipation. There was no fanfare, no grand celebration. No one cared much about Zelria. No one, except for Brody. When his ship touched down on the barren surface, the planet welcomed him with an eerie silence. The air was thin, and the sky was a dull gray, an oppressive blanket that seemed to weigh down on everything it touched. The land was dotted with ruins, each stone more ancient than the next, but there was no sign of life. No signs of anything living. Brody stepped out of his ship, a single bag slung over his shoulder, and breathed in the dry air, feeling the crunch of the barren soil beneath his boots. He had no real plans. He only had the hope that he could find the one thing that had eluded everyone else, the key to unlocking the language of the Zelrians. The first few days were uneventful. He spent most of his time exploring the ruins, carefully cataloging each new structure he encountered, noting the odd, unfamiliar symbols etched into the stones, symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the light of the distant sun. He tried to decipher them, but the task was overwhelming. There were patterns, of course, but nothing concrete. The language had never been anything like anything he had ever seen before. It was as if the Zelrians had developed a method of communication that was completely alien to everything humanity had ever known. After days of frustration, Brody decided to take a different approach. He had seen the old texts, the reports from previous expeditions, and he knew what was missing. No one had ever asked the right question. No one had ever tried to speak the language. Instead, they had tried to interpret it, to translate it into something more familiar, something they could understand. But the Zelrians had created something beyond simple words. They had created a language that could not be translated. It had to be spoken, felt, understood in the most intimate way. And so, Brody made the decision to immerse himself in the language. He would speak it, even if it meant starting from nothing. With nothing but his will, Brody began. Day after day, he spent hours in the ruins, repeating the symbols out loud, trying to match the shapes, the sounds, and the meanings. He mimicked the inflections of the symbols he found on the walls, tracing them with his fingers, attempting to breathe life into them, to make them real. At first, it was a hopeless task. His words were empty, meaningless sounds that had no connection to anything. But then, something began to shift. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but it was there. He felt a shift in the air, a faint echo in his voice, a resonance deep within his chest that wasn't there before. The first words he spoke, he barely understood. It was as if the language itself was a part of him, a forgotten instinct awakening from a long slumber. He didn't know what he had said, but the moment he spoke, he felt a connection. Something ancient, something deep and buried. And as the days passed, his attempts grew more fluid, more confident. It wasn't just the words that began to make sense, it was the meaning behind them. Brody was no longer just trying to speak the language. He was becoming a part of it. It was as if the words themselves were unlocking something in him, something primal, something tied to the very core of who the Zelrians had been. There were moments of clarity, moments when he felt like he could hear their voices distant, echoing but still so close, so tangible. It was in those moments that he truly felt he was speaking their language, connecting with them in a way that no one else could. And then, one day it happened. Brody stood before a particularly large structure, a massive, ancient temple that had stood untouched for millennia. The symbols carved into the walls were unlike anything he had seen before. They were complex, layered, and far beyond anything he had attempted. But he didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his fingers tracing the cool stone, and he began to speak the words. The sounds rolled off his tongue with an ease that surprised him, as if he had always known them. As he spoke, the temple around him seemed to respond. The air grew heavy, and the ground trembled beneath his feet. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, their shapes shifting as if they were alive. And then, from the darkness of the temple, a voice responded. It was soft at first, a whisper in the wind, but then it grew louder, more distinct. It was the voice of the Zelrians, calling out to him, speaking to him in a language he could now understand. "You are the one," the voice said, its words reverberating in his mind. "The one who can hear us. The one who can speak our voice." The voice faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Brody standing in stunned silence. The connection was made. He had done it. He had unlocked the language of the Zelrians. And in doing so, he had awakened something far greater than he could have imagined. He was no longer just an archaeologist. He was a bridge, a conduit between two worlds that had been separated for eons. And with that, he understood the truth of what the Zelrians had left behind, their legacy, their history, and the incredible responsibility he now carried. Lucas Brody stood there, speechless, in the heart of the ancient temple, feeling as though time itself had stopped around him. The voice that had spoken an echo of the Zelrians, calling to him through the vast distance of millennia, was no longer just a distant whisper. It was a living, breathing part of him, a language he had unlocked, a connection that had never existed between human beings and this long-dead race. He felt it pulse in his chest, resonating with something deep inside him that he couldn't yet understand. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, doubts, and possibilities. He had crossed a threshold, no longer just an observer of history, but an active participant in it. What did this mean for humanity, for the galaxy? What did it mean for him? The walls of the temple shifted as he took a step forward, the stone beneath his feet groaning as though the entire structure was waking up after a long, dormant sleep. The soft glow of the symbols etched into the surface of the stone grew brighter with each word Lucas spoke, each syllable of the language flowing more naturally, more fluidly, from his lips. This language, ancient, cryptic, and deeply powerful, was slowly becoming a part of him, embedding itself in his mind like a song he had forgotten, only now being remembered. His connection to the past was no longer a theory, it was real. The Zelrians, a species that had been lost to the annals of time, were speaking through him, through their language, their thoughts, their voices. But as he stood there, feeling the weight of his discovery settle over him, a new realization began to dawn on him. The Zelrians weren't just a people from the past, they were an ancient species with vast knowledge and power, and their language held something far greater than mere communication. It was a key, a code, a gateway to the past, and, perhaps, to the future. And Lucas, for reasons he couldn't entirely explain, had been chosen to unlock it. "Do you hear us?" The voice whispered again, this time louder, clearer. It wasn't just a voice, but a presence in ancient consciousness resonating in the space between them, in the space between the present and the past. Lucas's heart raced as he answered, "Yes, I hear you." The air around him seemed to thrum with energy, as if the words had unlocked something deep within the temple, something that had been waiting for eons to be heard. The ground beneath his feet trembled again, and the symbols on the walls shone brighter, swirling and shifting in a mesmerizing pattern. And then, before Lucas could react, a sudden flash of light engulfed the room, blinding him completely. When the light faded, Lucas found himself standing in the same spot, but the world around him had changed. The temple was no longer the decaying structure it had been moments before. It was vibrant and full of life, as though he had stepped into the past, to the height of the Zelrian civilization. He could see it now, the great halls of their cities, their structures towering above him like monoliths of glass and metal, shining in the light of a distant sun. The air was alive with a hum, a buzz of activity as beings of the same race as the Zelrians, but far more vibrant and alive, moved through the streets, their forms graceful and fluid. They were speaking, communicating in the same language that Lucas had just begun to understand. And as he stood there, surrounded by them, he realized something that shook him to his core. He was no longer just witnessing history. He was living it. He reached out instinctively, but as his fingers brushed against one of the structures, the vision flickered, and he found himself back in the ruined temple, the weight of the relic pressing down on him once again. The voice, now clearer and more present than ever, spoke again. "You are the last. The one who will understand. The one who will continue what we began." A shiver ran down Lucas's spine. He had always been fascinated by the idea of lost languages, of understanding cultures long gone. But it was different. This wasn't just knowledge. This was purpose. The relic's power was in him now. And whatever it meant, he knew there was no turning back. The Zelrians had left something behind, and Lucas had become its conduit. His understanding of their language, of their culture, was the key to something far greater than he had ever imagined. He had unlocked the door, but what lay beyond it was still a mystery. But he was ready. Or, at least, he thought he was. "Are you prepared for the path ahead?" the voice asked, its tone both kind and commanding. Lucas swallowed hard, his mind racing with the weight of the question. The path ahead. The galaxy was vast, and the ascendants, the terrifying force that had swept across the stars, were closing in on worlds like Zelria. He had to know more. He had to understand what was at stake. The Zelrians had left a legacy, but it wasn't just a relic. It was a purpose, a mission, one that had been handed down to him, and now it was up to him to decide what to do with it. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was anything but calm. The voice paused, as if considering his answer, then spoke again, this time with a note of finality. "Then you must leave the planet. You must go to the others, to the far reaches of the galaxy. You must find the elders of the others, the ones who can help you unlock the final pieces. The galaxy will fall without your help. There is no time to waste." Without another word, the temple began to fade, the shimmering vision of the Zelrians past vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Lucas stood in the now empty chamber, his pulse racing, his body drenched in sweat. The mission was clear, but the road ahead was uncertain. He had unlocked the language, the first step in what promised to be a journey that would take him farther than he had ever imagined. But he wasn't alone. The voice, the presence of the Zelrians, was with him, and now he was ready. Chapter 2. The Search for the Elders. The journey to understand the Zelrians had only just begun. Lucas Brody could no longer simply be an archaeologist, studying fragments of history in dusty libraries and forgotten ruins. He had been chosen for something far greater, something beyond his wildest expectations. The language, the relic, the mysterious voice, it was all a part of a puzzle that spanned galaxies, a puzzle he had to solve before it was too late. The first step was clear: leave Zelria. The planet had provided him with the key, but now he had to take that knowledge elsewhere. He couldn't do it alone, not anymore. The Zelrians had given him a glimpse of something bigger, something that was already unfolding across the stars. The Ascendants, a force unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, were slowly encroaching on worlds like Zelria, wiping out entire civilizations in their wake. Lucas knew that the galaxy was on the brink of total collapse. But how did the relic, the language, the Zelrian's voice fit into the fight? Lucas returned to his ship, the same one that had brought him to Zelria, but it now felt different. It wasn't just a transport anymore. It was his link to the rest of the galaxy, his lifeline. He was no longer just a simple archaeologist. He was a messenger, a beacon of hope, carrying with him the knowledge of an ancient civilization that could change the fate of the galaxy. As he activated the ship's engines and prepared for departure, the voice echoed in his mind again, soothing and resolute. "Go, Lucas Brody. Find the elders. The galaxy awaits." With those words, he set course for the stars, knowing that this was only the beginning. Lucas Brody sat in the cockpit of his ship, the hum of the engines beneath him familiar yet alien, a reminder that everything in his life had shifted. He wasn't just flying to a new destination now. He was carrying the fate of entire civilizations on his shoulders. The galaxy was vast, but it had its corners, its hidden pockets where ancient knowledge could be found, where the last remnants of races long forgotten could offer their secrets. His journey was one of discovery, but also one of urgency. The coordinates were set, the destination clear: a space station known as Selene's Forge. It was a place whispered about in the fringes of galactic society, an ancient outpost established by a coalition of alien elders, those few species that had lived for millennia and held the wisdom of ages. The Forge had been a place of refuge for the old species, a meeting point for those with knowledge of the most arcane forces in the galaxy. It was a place where the Zelrians had once visited, long before their fall, to learn from those who had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Lucas had heard rumors, stories of these elders, but no one had seen them for centuries. No one knew exactly where they had gone or if they were still alive. But the voice had pointed him here. The elders were the next step, those who could help him unlock the true power of the Zelrian language, the relic, and perhaps a weapon powerful enough to stand against the Ascendants. As the ship jumped through hyperspace, Lucas couldn't help but feel the weight of the task ahead of him. His mind swirled with questions. What would the elders be like? Would they accept him, a mere human, into their fold? Could they help him use the Zelrian language to stop the Ascendants before they destroyed everything? The journey through hyperspace seemed endless, a blur of light and shadow, and Lucas's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. He wasn't ready for what lay ahead. He wasn't a soldier or a leader. He was just a man who had stumbled upon something ancient and powerful. How could he use it to save the galaxy? His thoughts were interrupted as the ship jolted slightly, signaling their arrival at Selene's Forge. The station appeared on the screen, vast, ancient, and imposing, hanging like a dark jewel in the blackness of space. It had once been a beacon of hope, a place of learning and diplomacy. Now, its surface was scarred, its once bright lights dimmed by time and neglect. Yet, even in its decayed state, the Forge retained an aura of quiet power. The ship's scanners detected little life on board, if there was any at all. Lucas set the ship on course for the docking bay, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and fear. The silence of the station was unnerving, the absence of life a stark contrast to the bustling spaceports he had grown used to. The Forge felt abandoned, a place lost to time, but he knew it held the answers he sought. As he made his approach, he felt a subtle pull, as though the station itself was reaching out to him, calling him forward. He docked the ship and stepped into the airlock, the metallic clang echoing in the otherwise empty space. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the darkened interior of the Forge. The station was silent, save for the occasional flicker of dim lights overhead. Lucas activated his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating the walls covered in symbols, much like those he had seen on Zelria. They were etched into the walls, their meaning unclear, but he could feel the connection. This station was connected to the Zelrians, to the language, to the relic. It was where the pieces of the puzzle would come together. He moved cautiously through the halls, his steps echoing in the emptiness. The further he went, the more he felt the weight of the silence, the sense that something was watching him. It was as if the forge itself was alive, its presence thick in the air. The temperature was cold, the air stale, but there was a strange energy that hummed beneath it all. As he walked, he passed rooms filled with old, forgotten technology, ancient consoles, dusty holograms, and relics of a time long gone. At the heart of the station, Lucas found what he was looking for, a large chamber, its walls lined with towering pillars covered in symbols. In the center of the room stood an altar-like structure, an ancient chair facing a massive stone slab. The slab was covered in more of the same symbols, but these were different. They seemed to glow with a faint, otherworldly light, and as Lucas stepped closer, he felt the power that radiated from them. This was the heart of the forge, the place where the elders had once gathered, where the knowledge of the ancient races had been shared. And it was here that he would find the answers he had been searching for. As he reached the stone slab, he felt a presence in unmistakable, ethereal energy that washed over him. He wasn't alone. He had never truly been alone since he had first unlocked the Zelrian language. The elders had known he would come. He wasn't sure how, but somehow, they had been waiting for him. A voice broke the silence, low and ancient, resonating in his mind rather than through the air. "You have come far, human." Lucas froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice wasn't just speaking to him, it was speaking through him, wrapping itself around his thoughts. He felt it in his very soul, an ancient intelligence, an awareness far beyond anything he had ever encountered. "You are the one who can hear us," the voice continued, its tone both welcoming and filled with a quiet authority. "The one who has unlocked the language of the Zelrians. The one who will guide the galaxy through the coming darkness." Lucas's breath caught in his throat. What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The Ascendants are coming," the voice said, its tone shifting to one of somber finality. "They will stop at nothing to conquer this galaxy, to erase all that we have built. You, human, are the last hope. You must use the power of the Zelrian language to unite the galaxy's broken forces, to stop them before it is too late." "I don't understand," Lucas replied, his voice trembling. "I'm just an archaeologist. I have no power to lead a galaxy, to stop an empire. I've only just begun to understand the language. How can I dash?" "You already possess the power," the voice interrupted, its presence wrapping around him like a cloak. "The language of the Zelrians is not just a tool of communication. It is a force, a power that can shape reality itself. You must learn to wield it, to call upon the ancient forces that lie dormant within the galaxy. The Zelrians knew this power, and they left it to you. The relic, the language, it is your weapon." Lucas's mind was racing. He had never signed up for this. He was just a man, a scholar. But now, here he was, standing in the heart of a forgotten station, hearing the voice of an ancient race, and being told that he alone had the power to save the galaxy. The weight of it pressed down on him, suffocating. But there was no turning back now. "You are not alone," the voice said, as if sensing his doubt. "The elders will guide you, teach you what you must know. But it is up to you, human, to take the first step." The chamber fell silent once more, and Lucas, standing in the heart of the forge, knew that the true journey was only just beginning. Chapter 3, The First Lesson. The stars outside the window of Lucas's ship seemed to stretch on forever as he made his way deeper into the unknown. The forge had given him more than just knowledge, it had given him a mission, a purpose. But what he had learned was only the beginning. The elder's words echoed in his mind as he left Celine's forge behind, heading for the next phase of his journey, to unlock the full power of the Zelrian language and to use it to unite the galaxy's fractured forces before the Ascendants could complete their conquest. The task before him was daunting. He had no allies, no army, no experience with leadership or strategy. But what he did have was something far more powerful: the language. The relic, the knowledge that the Zelrians had left behind for him, and for him alone. Lucas knew that his journey would take him to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The elders had spoken of the forces that lay dormant in the cosmos, powers that only a few could access. He was one of those few, and the path ahead of him would be filled with both discovery and danger. The Ascendants were relentless, and their warships were already moving toward the heart of the galaxy. He had to move fast, and as his ship entered the jump corridor, Lucas could feel the presence of the Zelrians with him, their voices whispering through his mind, urging him forward. The first lesson had begun. The stars outside Lucas's ship were a blur of bright pinpricks as it hurtled through hyperspace, the faint hum of the engines vibrating through his body as he sat in the pilot's seat. There was little comfort in the silence that surrounded him. His mind raced with the gravity of the situation. The Elder's words reverberated in his mind, over and over. "You are the one who will guide the galaxy." It was a statement that, at the time, had felt almost abstract. Now, with the ship on its journey to the next phase of his mission, it felt like an impossible weight pressing down on him, suffocating him. How could he, a single human, carry the hopes of an entire galaxy on his shoulders? He wasn't a warrior, a tactician, or a leader. He was just an archaeologist, someone who studied the past, unearthed relics, and attempted to make sense of forgotten histories. But the relic, the language of the Zelrians, had changed all of that. He could still remember the feeling of his fingers brushing against the ancient symbols, the vibrations that surged through his chest, as if the very air around him had awakened to his touch. The Zelrians had left something behind for him, something powerful, something that could potentially change the entire course of the galaxy. He had unlocked their language, but with it, a floodgate of questions had opened. What exactly was this power? How could he use it to stop the Ascendants? And what would happen if he failed? As the ship sped through the expanse of space, Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, trying to center himself. The cold metal of the cockpit, the faint buzz of the consoles, and the hum of the engines were a comfort in their own right. It was the only familiar thing left in his life. He could still feel the presence of the Zelrians, like a soft whisper in his mind, guiding him, but it wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to understand the true depth of their language, the relic, the power it held. He needed to know how to use it. The next phase of his journey led him to the planet of Drethos 5, an ancient world that had once been a hub of knowledge for the galaxy's oldest civilizations. It was said that the planet's temples contained some of the oldest records in the galaxy, and if there was anyone who could help him unlock the full potential of the Zelrian language, it would be the sages of Drethos 5. As the ship descended toward the planet's surface, the atmosphere outside the viewport became thick with clouds, swirling around the ship as it entered the atmosphere. Lucas's fingers danced over the ship's controls, bringing it in for a smooth landing. The landing pad was located near the base of an enormous mountain range, the peaks shrouded in mist, their jagged forms looming like silent sentinels. The planet's surface was rugged and barren, dotted with the crumbling remains of ancient structures, temples, libraries, and monuments to civilizations long past. Drethos 5 had once been a center of knowledge, but over the millennia, it had become a forgotten world, its great cities now reduced to dust. As the landing gear touched down, Lucas opened the hatch and stepped out onto the barren surface. The air was thin and dry, but the sharpness of the atmosphere was oddly invigorating. The planet was quiet, almost eerily so. There was no sign of life. No bustling cities, no vibrant cultures. Just the ruins. It was as if the world had been abandoned by everyone, save for the ghosts of the past. But Lucas knew the truth. The sages were here, hidden away, waiting for someone who could speak their language, the language of the elders. And Lucas Brody was that someone. He made his way toward the temple complex, navigating the labyrinthine pathways that wound through the ruins. The structures were ancient, their stone surfaces worn by time, but there was still a sense of grandeur to them. He could feel the weight of history in the air, the imprint of those who had once walked these halls, seeking knowledge and understanding. But Lucas wasn't here for knowledge alone. He was here for something far more significant: answers to the mysteries of the language, the relic, and his place in this galaxy-wide struggle. As he reached the entrance to the central temple, a figure appeared in the doorway, tall and cloaked in a long, flowing robe. The figure was shrouded in shadows, their face hidden beneath the hood, but Lucas felt an undeniable presence. The sages of Drethos 5 had waited for him. They knew he was coming. They had been waiting for someone who could understand the language of the Zelrians, someone who could unlock the power that lay hidden in the ancient relics of their world. And now, Lucas had arrived. "You've come." The voice of the sage resonated, calm and deep. It was as if the voice carried with it the weight of centuries, the knowledge of 1,000 generations. The sage stepped forward, revealing their face, a smooth, ageless countenance, eyes glowing faintly with an inner light. You are the one who speaks the language of the Zelrians. Lucas nodded, swallowing hard. I do, he said, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. I've unlocked the language, but I don't understand its full potential. I need to know how to use it, how to stop the ascendants. The sage studied him for a moment, their eyes searching him as if weighing his worth. The language you speak is not just a means of communication, they said softly, almost reverently. It is the key to all things. The Zelrians were not just a species, they were the architects of the universe's balance. Their language is the foundation upon which all things are built. It is the thread that ties everything together, and it is also the power that can destroy or restore. Destroy or restore? Lucas repeated, his mind reeling from the implications. How? The Zelrians were the keepers of the balance between light and dark, order and chaos, the sage continued. Their language was the force that held the galaxy together. But it can also unravel it. The Ascendants seek to control it, to use its power to conquer. But they do not understand it. They cannot. Only one who is chosen, only one who has unlocked the language can wield its true power. Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. I've unlocked it, he said slowly. But I don't know how to control it. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. The sage smiled faintly. That is why you have come to us. We will teach you. But be warned. This power is not for the faint of heart. It is not a gift to be used lightly. The power you seek will require more than just knowledge. It will require sacrifice. Lucas felt the weight of the sage's words settle over him like a heavy cloak. He had come to Drethos, 5 seeking answers, but he had found more than he bargained for. The Zelrian language was not just a tool. It was a force, an ancient, unfathomable power that could change the course of the galaxy. And he was the one chosen to wield it. But as the sage had said, it would come with a price. Teach me, Lucas said, his voice firm despite the doubts swirling inside him. Teach me how to control it. The sage nodded solemnly. You are ready. The first lesson begins now. Chapter 4, The Price of Power. The days that followed were a blur of study and practice. Lucas spent hours in the ancient temple, working alongside the sage, learning the true nature of the Zelrian language and its power. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The words themselves were not just sounds, they were woven into the fabric of reality. The language had the power to shape matter, bend light, and influence time. But the more Lucas learned, the more he realized that he was walking a razor's edge. The power was overwhelming, and the temptation to misuse it was strong. Every word he spoke resonated through the universe, and every action he took had consequences. The sage guided him, teaching him the ancient rituals, the subtle nuances of the language. There were moments of clarity, moments when Lucas felt like he truly understood the power he had unlocked. But there were also moments of doubt, moments when he wondered if he was in over his head, if he could truly control something so vast, so ancient. One evening, as the twin moons of Drethos, 5 rose in the sky, casting a pale light over the ruins, Lucas sat alone in the central temple, his thoughts swirling. He had learned much, but he felt far from ready. The Ascendants were still out there, and time was running out. If he was to stop them, he would need to harness the full power of the Zelrian language. But the cost was becoming clearer with each passing day. As he pondered his next steps, a familiar voice broke through his thoughts. You are struggling, the sage said, appearing silently behind him. The power you wield is vast, but it is not without its cost. The Zelrians knew this. They understood the sacrifice. I don't know if I can do it, Lucas admitted, his voice tight with uncertainty. I don't know if I can control it. The sage's eyes glowed softly in the darkness, their gaze unwavering. You must. The fate of the galaxy rests in your hands. The Ascendants will stop at nothing to destroy what the Zelrians built. You must be ready. Lucas looked up at the ancient walls of the temple, the symbols etched into the stone glowing softly in the moonlight. He didn't feel ready, but he knew there was no choice. The galaxy needed him, and he had no time to hesitate. I'm ready, he said, his voice steadier now. Teach me everything. Lucas Brody stood in the center of the ancient temple, the weight of his choice pressing on him like a physical force. The sage's eyes, glowing faintly in the twilight of Drethos, 5, were fixed on him with a quiet intensity that made him feel as though every part of him was being scrutinized. The air was thick with the knowledge of millennia, ancient wisdom, and the quiet hum of energy that filled the chamber. Lucas could feel it, the power, just waiting to be unleashed. It was not simply a tool. It was a living force, an extension of reality itself. The sage had told him that he was the key to wielding the Zelrian language, that the galaxy's fate depended on him. But as Lucas stood in the heart of this forgotten temple, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't ready. What if he failed? What if the immense power he had unlocked was too much for him to control? The cost, the sage had warned him, was high. He would have to sacrifice a part of himself, a piece of his humanity, to wield this power effectively. It wasn't something that could be controlled with pure will alone. There was a price for everything, and Lucas was beginning to understand just how steep that price might be. "You are ready," the sage said, breaking the silence. "The first step is to speak the language, to understand it not just with your mind, but with your soul. It must become a part of you, woven into the very fabric of your being. Only then will you be able to unlock the full potential of the relic." Lucas swallowed hard, his mind swirling with uncertainty. He had spent days learning the language, absorbing its complexities, but it had always felt distant, like something that could slip through his fingers if he wasn't careful. He had heard the voice of the Zelrians, felt the energy of their power surge through him, but he hadn't yet fully connected to it, not in the way the sage wanted. "How do I do this?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling. "How do I make it part of me? I've already unlocked it. I've spoken the words, but how do I become it?" The sage's expression softened, and they took a step closer, their presence overwhelming but not oppressive. "The language is not just spoken, Lucas Brody. It is felt. It is understood in the deepest parts of your being. It is a bridge between this world and all that exists beyond it. You must feel the words. You must let them flow through you, not just as sounds, but as an extension of your spirit. Only then will you be ready to use the relic's power as it was intended." Lucas closed his eyes, focusing on the deep well of energy within him. He could feel the language there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be unlocked. It was like a song, a rhythm he had heard in his dreams, but could never quite remember. His fingers twitched, and the soft glow of the temple symbols pulsed in time with his heartbeat. It was as though the relic was calling to him, urging him to finally take the step that would make him one with it. For a long moment, Lucas simply stood there, breathing in the silence of the temple, letting the energy of the language wrap itself around him. His mind cleared, and slowly, the patterns in the air began to form. He could see them now, the symbols of the Zelrians, not just etched in stone, but living in the space around him. The patterns danced in the air, swirling and weaving together in a complex, beautiful dance. The words of the language were no longer just sounds in his ears, they were living, breathing entities, waiting to be spoken. He opened his mouth, and the words came not from his mind, but from somewhere deeper. They flowed like a river, each syllable carrying with it a weight, a power that shook the very foundations of the temple. The symbols around him flared to life, glowing brighter with each word he spoke. He felt the power surge through him, filling him with a sense of purpose, a sense of destiny. The relic responded, vibrating in time with his voice, aligning itself with his every thought, every breath. The ground beneath him trembled, and the temple walls began to shift, rearranging themselves as the power of the language took hold. Lucas gasped, his mind expanding as he felt the energy coursing through him, flooding his senses. The relic was no longer just a tool. It was a part of him, now its power intertwined with his soul. He could feel the balance of the galaxy shifting, the ancient energies of the Zelrians awakening once more. "You are ready," the sage's voice said, reverberating in his mind, a deep, resonant hum that carried the weight of ages. "You have unlocked the full potential. Now, you must take the next step." "What do I do now?" Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible as the power surged through him. The sage stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Now, you must use it. The Ascendants are coming. Their fleet is already on its way, and they will not stop until they have crushed everything in their path. You are the only one who can stand against them. Use the power of the Zelrians to unite the galaxy's forces. Show them that there is still hope." Lucas nodded slowly, the weight of the task pressing down on him. The power of the Zelrians was immense, but it was also fragile, like a flame in the wind. He couldn't let it go out. He couldn't afford to falter now. The fate of the galaxy was in his hands. With a deep breath, Lucas closed his eyes, focusing on the task ahead. He reached out with the power within him, sending a wave of energy through the galaxy. It was like sending a signal, a call to arms, a message to the galaxy's remaining forces. It would reach them, he knew. The language of the Zelrians was not just words. It was a force that could be felt, that could travel through space and time. The message was clear. The Ascendants could not be allowed to win. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the voice of the sage echoed in his mind once more, but this time, there was something different in it. It was a note of pride, of approval. You have done it, Lucas Brody. You have awakened the galaxy. Now, you must lead them. Epilogue: The Legacy of the Zelrians. The war with the Ascendants raged on, but Lucas Brody was no longer a mere bystander. With the power of the Zelrian language at his command, he united the fractured forces of the galaxy, leading them in the fight against the Ascendants. The relic had given him the strength to do what no one else could. He had become the beacon of hope for countless civilizations, the one who would bring balance to the galaxy once again. As the battle for the galaxy reached its climax, Lucas knew that the war was far from over. The Ascendants were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. But Lucas had something they could never have: the power of the Zelrian language, a language that could shape reality itself, a power that could restore balance or destroy everything. In the end, Lucas Brody had become more than just a human. He had become a part of something greater than himself, a living bridge between the ancient Zelrians and the galaxy of the future. And with the language in his grasp, he was ready to face whatever the future held.